always kept my good income hidden and never flaunted my success. Bradley and I had been dating for almost 2 years, and we were already thinking about marriage. Before meeting his parents, I wanted to test their reaction, so I decided to play the role of a simple, not-so-wealthy girl from a small town. But as soon as I approached their house, people have always been quick to judge by appearances. Expensive clothes, a well-groomed look, a beautiful car. All of this creates a certain impression, shaping an opinion of a person before they even open their mouth. I learned this firsthand. My name is Megan, and from an early age I grew used to being judged by outward signs. I was born in a small town called Springfield. My parents were ordinary people of average means. My father worked as a mechanic at the local factory, and my mother was a schoolteacher. We didn't live in luxury, but we never suffered poverty either. Yet there was someone in my life who strongly influenced my worldview. My maternal grandmother. A woman with an extraordinarily sharp mind and an iron will. She raised 3 children almost on her own. My grandfather died young, and she had to learn to survive by herself. She used to tell me, "Megan, remember the most important thing in this life, independence. Especially for a woman. Never rely completely on a man, even if you love him with all your heart. Fate is unpredictable. You must always have your own source of income, your own roof over your head, and your own money for a rainy day." Those words sank deep into my soul. Perhaps even too deep. At school I studied diligently, one could even say obsessively. I longed to escape our little town, to see the big world, to achieve something significant. After graduating with honors, I enrolled at an economics university in New York. Studying came easily to me, but life in a metropolis turned out to be far more difficult than I had imagined. The high costs, the rush, the competition. My parents helped as much as they could, but their resources were limited. So from my very first year I began to work part-time. First as a waitress, then as a math tutor. By the time I graduated, I had already built an impressive list of contacts and earned a reputation as a capable specialist. I was offered a job at a large consulting firm. The work was interesting but extremely demanding. 12-hour days, constant overtime, heavy responsibility. But it didn't scare me. I was young, full of energy and ambition. A couple of years later, I realized I wanted more. Having gained experience and knowledge, I decided to start my own business. I began small, consulting for small enterprises on cost optimization and taxation. I worked almost around the clock, investing every earned dollar back into the business. Gradually, the client base grew. I hired assistants and opened a small office. By the age of 28, I was already the owner of a successful consulting firm with branches in several cities. My income allowed me to live in a way I had never even dreamed of in my youth. A spacious apartment of my own in a good Manhattan neighborhood, a premium-class car, the ability to travel the world. But here was the strange thing: the more successful I became, the more I noticed people's attitudes changing. Men started behaving differently once they learned about my status and income. Some were openly intimidated and felt insecure, others saw me only as a source of money, and still others tried to compete, proving they were more successful and wealthier. In any case, real, equal relationships never worked out. Women, too, reacted in different ways, from envious admiration to outright hostility. So I made a decision. A decision that would greatly affect my life. I began to hide my real status and income from new acquaintances. Not that I pretended to be poor. I simply didn't put my success on display. I wore discreet clothing from well-known but not flashy brands. I drove a good, but not ostentatiously expensive car. If someone asked about my work, would answer vaguely, "I work in financial consulting." On dates, I preferred to pay for myself, to avoid awkward situations. This strategy allowed me to get to know people better, to see their true attitude unclouded by ideas of my wealth. And it worked. For a while. I met Bradley at French language courses. I always sought self-improvement, and learning languages had long been one of my passions. The group was full of interesting, versatile people, and classes were lively and informal. Bradley stood out from the rest. Tall, with well-defined features and attentive brown eyes, he carried himself with such calm dignity that he naturally drew attention. But it wasn't only his appearance that attracted me. He was intelligent, well-read, with a subtle sense of humor. He worked as an architect in a small bureau and was passionate about photography and jazz. Our acquaintance began with a joint project. The teacher divided the group into pairs, and Bradley and I had to prepare a presentation on French culture. We would linger in cafes after classes, discussing the material, and before long our conversations would shift from cultural topics to personal stories and philosophies. After the presentation, which, by the way, was a huge success with the group, Bradley invited me to a contemporary photography exhibition. I agreed, and that date became the first of many. We strolled through evening New York, went to movies and theaters, discovered cozy cafes and fascinating exhibitions together. Being with Bradley was easy and comfortable. He didn't try to impress me, didn't boast about his achievements, didn't seek to dominate. We were equals, and I liked that. I told him about my job in general terms, without going into details. I said I consulted companies on financial matters and worked for a small firm. He showed no particular interest in my financial situation, which suited me just fine. We split the bills on our dates. Sometimes he insisted on paying for both, but without the demonstrative generosity of a wealthy suitor. Bradley lived in a two-room apartment he had inherited from his grandmother. The furnishings were simple but tasteful. Bookshelves, a collection of vinyl records, several of his own photographs on the walls. He wasn't chasing luxury or brands, and that appealed to me. Over time, our relationship grew deeper. We shared our most intimate thoughts, dreams, fears. 6 months after we met, Bradley told me he loved me. It happened on the Hudson River during a boat trip. The sunset painted the water golden, soft music played, and the moment seemed perfect for a confession. I responded in kind, and it was no lie. I truly fell in love with this man, his calm confidence, intelligence, kindness, his ability to listen and understand. But my secret still remained with me. Bradley had never been to my home. I explained it by saying that I lived with a roommate and it would be inconvenient. In truth, I was afraid that my apartment, even the most modest of the 3 I owned, would reveal my real status. I also never introduced him to my colleagues, always saying that I didn't mix work with my personal life. Our relationship went on, and it was wonderful. We spent weekends together, sometimes going out of town or visiting nearby cities for excursions. I felt that I had found the person I wanted to spend my life with. But the shadow of what was left unsaid clouded my happiness. I knew that sooner or later I would have to lay all my cards on the table. 1 year and 8 months after we met, Bradley proposed. It happened during a trip to Boston, where we had gone for a long weekend. We were standing on the waterfront, admiring the city lights against the night sky. He dropped to one knee and took out a small velvet box with a ring. "Megan, you have become my whole world. I can't imagine my life without you. Marry me." The ring was modest but very beautiful. A thin gold band with a small diamond in the center. I burst into tears of happiness and said yes. At that moment, it seemed to me that every problem could be solved, that my little lie didn't matter in the face of our love. After returning to New York, we began discussing the wedding. Bradley wanted me to meet his parents. They lived in the suburbs, in their own house, and according to him, they were eager to meet the girl their son spoke of with such delight. "They're wonderful people," Bradley assured me. "Dad teaches history at the university, Mom is a doctor. They're intelligent, kind people. I'm sure you'll get along." I was nervous before the meeting. I wanted to make a good impression on my future in-laws. But something inside me was restless. What if they turned out to be snobs? What if they thought their son deserved a wealthier match? What if, once they found out about my real situation, they decided I was a deceiver who had hidden the truth from their son? These thoughts gave me no peace. And then a plan formed in my head, perhaps not the wisest, but at the time it seemed reasonable. I decided to conduct a little experiment. Instead of appearing before Bradley's parents as a modest but well-off city girl, I would play the role of a provincial girl of very modest means. Why? I wanted to see their true reaction. If they accepted me that way, as a simple girl from the countryside, then they really were the kind, intelligent people Bradley spoke of. If not, that would make me question the future. I told my fiancé nothing. Partly because I feared his reaction, partly because I wanted his behavior to be natural, too. This was my game, my experiment, and I was ready to take responsibility for it. I prepared thoroughly for the meeting. Instead of my usual designer clothes, I put on a simple mass-market dress, slightly too big and not the best cut. My makeup was minimal, and I tied my hair back in a plain ponytail. My nails, usually neat with a neutral manicure, I left unpainted. I took off my expensive but discreet watch and jewelry, leaving only the engagement ring. But most importantly, I thought through my story. I decided to say I worked as an assistant in a small firm for a very modest salary. That I grew up in Springfield, that part was true, and had only recently moved to New York, renting a room, which was a complete lie. That my parents were simple people of modest means, partly true. They really were humble people, though I had long since provided them with a comfortable life. The day of the visit came. Bradley picked me up in his car, a mid-range sedan he had driven since we met. When he saw me, he slightly raised his eyebrows. "You look different today," he remarked, helping me into the car. I decided to dress more simply. I brushed it off. "I don't want to look too much like a city girl in front of your parents. After all, it's the first meeting." He smiled and kissed me on the cheek. "Nonsense. They'll love you in any way. Just be yourself." Those words struck me painfully. Because I was about to be anyone but myself. For a moment, I wanted to cancel everything, to confess my fears and doubts. But the moment was gone. Bradley had already started the engine, and we were on our way. The drive took about an hour. We left New York, passed through several small towns, and turned into a well-kept private community. I looked around carefully. The neighborhood looked very respectable. Well-kept yards, solid houses, clean roads. Clearly not the cheapest place to live. "Have your parents lived here long?" I asked, trying to keep my voice casual. "About 10 years, Bradley replied. "Before that, they had an apartment in the city, but when I started college and moved out, they decided to relocate to the suburbs. Dad had always dreamed of his own house with a garden." We drove a little farther and stopped in front of a beautiful 2-story house of dark brick. The yard was well cared for, with a neatly trimmed lawn, flower beds, and a small decorative pond. At the entrance stood 2 spreading linden trees, casting a pleasant shade. As I stepped out of the car, I felt my heart begin to beat faster. Suddenly I was scared. What was I doing? Why was I staging this charade? What would happen when the truth came out? And it would inevitably come out if Bradley and I truly got married. But it was too late to turn back. Bradley had already taken my hand and was leading me to the house. We climbed the porch steps, and he rang the bell. A few seconds later the door opened, and on the threshold stood an elegant woman of about 55. Slim, with short light brown hair already streaked with gray, and strikingly youthful, lively eyes. The same brown eyes as Bradley's. Mom, meet Megan, Bradley said with undisguised pride in his voice. So glad to meet you, the woman smiled, extending her hand to me. Phyllis. At last we finally meet. Bradley has told us so much about you. I shook her hand, feeling a slight tremor in my fingers. Hello. It's very nice to meet you too. Come in, don't just stand on the porch, Phyllis invited. Donald is in the kitchen, finishing up lunch. He's our great cook. We stepped into a spacious hallway decorated in light tones. On the right there was a coat rack, on the left a large mirror in a wooden frame. I glanced at my reflection and winced inwardly. In this ridiculous dress, with my simple hairstyle, I looked far less attractive than usual. But that was part of the plan. Phyllis led us into the living room combined with the dining area. It was a bright, spacious room with large windows overlooking the garden. The furnishings were tasteful but not ostentatiously expensive. Solid furniture, paintings on the walls, bookshelves filled with books. The table was already set for 4. Make yourselves at home, said Phyllis. I'll go get Donald. She left, and Bradley and I stayed in the living room. He wrapped his arm around my shoulders and whispered in my ear. Don't worry so much. Everything will be fine. I nodded, unable to find words in response. Inside me, conflicting feelings wrestled. On one hand, the house and its hostess had made a pleasant impression on me. No flashy luxury, no arrogance. On the other hand, I still didn't know how they would react to a modest girl from a small town. A minute later Phyllis returned, accompanied by a tall man about her age. Graying hair, glasses in thin frames, an attentive gaze. He wore simple trousers and a shirt, over which he still had on a kitchen apron. Meet my husband, Donald, Phyllis introduced him. Very pleased, the man said, taking off his apron and extending his hand to me. I've heard a lot about you from our son. Glad we finally meet. Pleased to meet you too, I replied, trying to keep my voice natural. Please, come to the table, Donald invited. I hope you're hungry. I've made my specialty, duck with apples. We sat down at the table. Bradley and I on one side, his parents on the other. Phyllis poured white wine into glasses, while Donald began carving the appetizing-looking duck. Megan, Bradley said you work in finance, Phyllis asked, handing me a plate of salad. There it was, the moment of truth. The beginning of my experiment. Not exactly, I replied, lowering my voice slightly, as if embarrassed. I work as an assistant in a small firm. I handle tasks for the management, answer calls, do paperwork. Nothing special. Bradley shot me a surprised look but stayed silent. I felt a pang of guilt. Until now, I hadn't gone into details about my work, only saying I did financial consulting. Now I was openly lying. And how do you like this job? Donald asked with interest. Do you enjoy it? It's fine, I guess, I shrugged. Of course, the pay isn't much, but it's enough to get by. And for a girl from a small town, it's not so bad. You're from a small town. Phyllis repeated. Bradley never mentioned that. Yes, I grew up in Springfield, I nodded. That part was true, and speaking it felt easier. My parents still live there. My father works as a mechanic, my mother is a schoolteacher. After high school I moved to New York to attend university. It wasn't easy, but I managed. That's worthy of respect, Donald said sincerely. Coming from a small town to a big city, getting into university, finding work. Not many people could do that. I smiled modestly, noting to myself that their first reaction seemed positive. I saw no disdain or disappointment in the eyes of my future in-laws. And where do you live now? Phyllis asked. Do you rent an apartment? A room, I corrected. My salary isn't enough for a place of my own, and my parents can't help me. They don't have a very high income themselves. Now Bradley was staring at me in open amazement. I had never told him such details about my living situation. Whenever the subject of my home came up, I always diverted the conversation or claimed I lived with a roommate. "And how much do you pay for the room, if you don't mind me asking?" Phyllis said. That question caught me off guard. I hadn't prepared for such details and feared saying something that might later seem illogical. $1,500 a month, I said at random, hoping the amount sounded believable for a room in New York. Quite a lot, Donald shook his head. It's Manhattan, I explained. Everything is expensive there. But it's more convenient for me to get to work. I see, Phyllis nodded. And what would you like to do in the future? Do you have any plans, dreams? I hesitated. I didn't want to talk about my real achievements, but I also didn't want to completely downplay my ambitions. I'd like to grow in the financial field, I answered cautiously. Maybe one day become a financial consultant or analyst. But I still have a lot to learn. That's a good goal, Donald nodded approvingly. Finance is a promising field. The conversation shifted to more general topics. Bradley's parents asked about my hobbies, what I liked to read, what music I listened to. I answered honestly, seeing no point in lying about such things. The atmosphere at the table was warm and relaxed. Phyllis and Donald turned out to be engaging conversationalists, well-read and with a good sense of humor. After lunch, Donald suggested having coffee in the garden. The day was warm, and the idea of sitting outdoors appealed to everyone. We moved to the spacious veranda, where wicker chairs and a small table stood. Phyllis brought a coffee pot and cups, and Donald took a box of chocolates from the sideboard. Megan, have you thought about where you'll live after the wedding? Phyllis asked as she poured coffee into the cups. I cast a quick glance at Bradley. We had actually discussed this question before, and he had suggested moving in with me, insisting that his apartment was too small for the two of us. I had brushed it off, unwilling to reveal my secret. To be honest, I don't know, I answered cautiously. Bradley has his own apartment, though it's not very big. And I only rent a room. Probably it would make more sense to live with him. In that two-room apartment. Phyllis shook her head skeptically. It's far too cramped. The two of you will be uncomfortable, and what if children come along? Mom, Bradley interrupted her. We haven't decided yet. Maybe over time we'll buy something bigger. With what money, may I ask? Phyllis fixed her eyes on her son. Your salary at the Architectural Bureau isn't that large. And Megan, it seems, isn't exactly a millionaire either. We'll manage, Bradley answered curtly. I noticed his shoulders tense. Clearly, he found this conversation unpleasant. Don't take it the wrong way, son, Donald said gently. Your mother is just worried about your future. Perhaps we could help with the down payment for an apartment? After all, having your own place is important. I felt my cheeks flush with heat. Bradley's parents were ready to help us financially, thinking we needed it. It was both touching and awkward at the same time. Thank you, Dad, Bradley placed his hand on my shoulder. But we'll handle it ourselves. Right, Megan? Of course, I mumbled, not knowing what else to say. As you wish, Phyllis took a sip of coffee. The offer still stands. And what about the wedding? Have you thought about what it will be like? We'd like a modest ceremony, Bradley replied. Just our closest friends and family. Reasonable, Donald nodded. Why waste money on a lavish celebration when you can invest it in something more practical? Exactly, Phyllis agreed. I've always believed that a sensible attitude toward money is an important quality. Especially nowadays. The conversation shifted again to broader topics. Bradley's parents talked about their work, their vacation plans, mutual acquaintances. The atmosphere was warm and friendly. I noticed no snobbery, no arrogance. On the contrary, they clearly tried to make me feel comfortable. When it was time to say goodbye, Phyllis suddenly hugged me and quietly said, "Come visit us again. We're so glad Bradley found such a good girl." Those words touched me deeply. They had accepted me. Or rather, the version of me I had presented to them. A modest girl from a small town. And that made me feel an even greater guilt for my deception. On the way home, Bradley was unusually silent. I sensed he wanted to say something but didn't dare. Finally, stopped at a traffic light, he turned to me. "Megan, what was that?" he asked directly. "Why did you tell my parents you live in a rented room and work as a simple assistant? That doesn't sound like the truth." I swallowed hard. The moment of truth had come sooner than I expected. "You're right," I admitted quietly. "That wasn't exactly the truth." "But why?" There was genuine bewilderment in his voice. "Why make up such things?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I wanted to see how your parents would treat a girl of very modest means," I confessed. "I wanted to see their reaction. To understand if they would accept me if I didn't live up to their expectations." Bradley shook his head in disbelief. "Did you really think my parents judge people by the size of their wallets?" "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I wasn't sure. I just wanted to make sure." "And? Did you?" His voice carried hurt. "Yes," I nodded. "Your parents turned out to be wonderful people. They were kind and attentive. No disdain, no arrogance." "I told you," Bradley said as he started driving again when the light turned green. "They're not that kind of people. They value someone for who they are, not for status or money." We drove in silence for several minutes. I felt I owed him more, that I needed to explain my motives more fully. "Bradley," I began, mustering courage. "There's something else I need to tell you. About myself. About my real life." He threw a quick glance at me but said nothing, focusing on the road. "I don't just work in finance," I continued. "I own my own consulting firm. A fairly successful one, to be exact." Bradley braked sharply and pulled over to the side of the road. Turning off the engine, he faced me. "What?" His eyes widened in shock. "I have my own business," I repeated. "I consult companies on financial matters, help optimize costs, develop growth strategies. I have offices in several cities, a staff of about 50 people. And you've been hiding this from me all this time." His voice was a mix of disbelief and hurt. "Yes," I lowered my eyes. "I hid it. Not that I completely lied. I just didn't tell the whole truth." "But why?" He looked at me as if seeing me for the first time. "Why couldn't you be honest with me?" It was a difficult question. I myself didn't fully understand my own motives. "I'm used to hiding my success," I began slowly. "You see, when people find out you have money, they start treating you differently. Some see only a wallet, others feel uncomfortable, and still others begin to envy or compete. It becomes very hard to understand who is sincere with you and who is not." Bradley stayed silent, reflecting on my words. "And besides," I went on, "you and I got along so well. You felt comfortable with me, and I with you. You never asked about my income, never showed interest in my financial situation. It was so refreshing. I was afraid that if I told you the truth, everything would change." "You thought I would treat you differently if I found out you were wealthy?" he asked after a pause. "I don't know," I shrugged. "Maybe. Some men feel uncomfortable next to a successful woman, especially if she earns more than they do. And you decided I was one of those men. His voice now carried a clear note of hurt. No, of course not. I tried to take his hand, but he pulled away. I wasn't sure. And I felt so good with you that I was afraid to ruin it all. Ruin it with the truth. He gave a bitter laugh. Seriously, Megan? I couldn't find an answer. Things were turning out worse than I had expected. So what else have you hidden from me? Bradley asked after a long silence. Where do you really live? In a penthouse on Central Park. I have an apartment in Manhattan, I replied quietly. And 2 more apartments that I rent out. And a house outside the city. Bradley let out a whistle. Impressive. And a car. You must have one, don't you? Yes, I nodded. But I rarely drive it. I prefer taxis or the subway. And all this time you pretended to be who? Just an ordinary girl of average means. He shook his head. And I, like a fool, believed it. I wasn't pretending, I objected. I just didn't flaunt my wealth. In everything else I was myself. The conversations we had, the interests I shared, those were real, Bradley. I wasn't playing a role, I just didn't talk about money. And today you weren't playing a role. He looked me straight in the eyes. A poor girl from a small town living in a rented room. That wasn't a performance. I bit my lip. I had no defense here. Today, yes, I was playing a role, I admitted. And I regret it. It was a foolish idea. I just wanted to see how your parents would react to a girl who had absolutely nothing. And how did they react? Bradley asked sarcastically. Very well, I answered sincerely. They were kind, attentive, they even offered to help us with the down payment for an apartment. They really are wonderful people, and I'm glad I met them. Yes, they are, Bradley nodded. Too bad they didn't meet the real you, but some invented version. Those words hurt more than I expected. Because he was right. I had deceived not only him, but also his parents. People who had treated me with genuine warmth. So what now? I asked after a long silence. Do you still want to marry me? Bradley took a deep breath and rubbed his face with his hands. I don't know, Megan. Honestly, I don't know. I need time to think it over. This is too much, too unexpected. I understand, I nodded, feeling a lump rise in my throat. You have every right to be angry with me. I acted foolishly and dishonestly. It's not about the money, Bradley said, starting the engine. It's about trust. You didn't trust me enough to be honest. And that hurts. The rest of the ride we spent in silence. Each of us was lost in our own thoughts. I felt awful. My experiment, which was supposed to test Bradley's parents, had turned into a test for our relationship. And it seemed we had failed. When we pulled up to the house where I supposedly rented a room, I didn't know what to say. Bradley didn't turn off the engine, making it clear he had no intention of coming inside. Call me when you're ready to talk, I said, opening the door. I'm very sorry, Bradley. Truly. He nodded without looking at me. I'll call. I just need time. I stepped out of the car and closed the door. Bradley drove off immediately, not waiting for me to go inside. But in fact, I had no reason to enter. It was someone else's house. I waited until his car disappeared around the corner, then caught a taxi to my real apartment. The whole way I kept thinking about what had happened. How could I have been so foolish? Why had I staged that ridiculous performance? Why couldn't I just be honest with the man I loved? When I got home, I headed straight for the shower. I wanted to wash everything off: fatigue, shame, guilt. But it wasn't so easy to get rid of the heavy thoughts. Coming out of the shower, I looked at myself in the mirror. In front of me stood a successful businesswoman, owner of a company with multi-million-dollar turnover. A woman who had achieved so much in life on her own. And the same woman had just, perhaps, destroyed her relationship with the man she loved because of foolish fears and mistrust. My attention was caught by the engagement ring on my finger. A thin gold band with a small diamond. Modest, but elegant. Perfect. A symbol of love and trust. Trust that I had failed to live up to. I slipped the ring off and placed it on the shelf. I couldn't bring myself to wear it now, when our future was so uncertain. Changing into home clothes, I went into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of wine. The apartment I lived in was spacious and stylish. Panoramic windows, expensive furniture, works of art on the walls. Everything here spoke of wealth and success. And all of this I had hidden from Bradley. I thought back to how this whole story of hiding my wealth had begun. After several failed relationships, where men either felt uncomfortable because of my success or saw me only as a wallet, I decided it was better not to reveal my financial situation when meeting someone new. At the time, it had seemed like a sensible decision. But now, looking at the consequences, I was no longer so sure. When I met Bradley, he seemed different. A man for whom money wasn't the most important thing in life. Intelligent, educated, with diverse interests. I felt at ease with him, and I was afraid to ruin everything by revealing the truth about my status. But shouldn't real relationships be built on trust and honesty? Can happiness be built on a foundation of half-truths and omissions? I picked up my phone, thinking of calling Bradley. But what would I say to him? With what words could I explain my behavior? How could I make him understand my fears and doubts? And most importantly, how could I win back his trust? But it was too early to call. He himself had said he needed time. And I had to respect that. Putting the phone down, I took a sip of wine and walked over to the window. Evening New York stretched out before me in all its splendor. The lights of the skyscrapers, the rush of the avenues, the steady flow of traffic across the bridges. A city of opportunities, the city where I had built myself from scratch. But at that moment I felt incredibly lonely in this vast metropolis. I had achieved success in business, become financially independent, secured a comfortable life for myself. But what did it all mean if I could lose the man I loved because of my own foolishness and mistrust? In the morning I woke up with a headache. The night had been restless, I had struggled to fall asleep, and when I finally did, I dreamed anxious dreams. After a shower and a strong coffee, I decided to call Bradley. But his phone was turned off. I didn't know how to interpret that. Maybe he still wasn't ready to talk. Or maybe he was deliberately avoiding me. Or perhaps his phone had just run out of battery. At work I couldn't concentrate. My thoughts constantly returned to the day before, to Bradley's face when he learned the truth, to his words about trust. My employees noticed my state but tactfully said nothing. Toward evening I decided to try again and called Bradley. This time his phone was on, but he didn't answer. After the fifth ring I hung up, not wanting to seem pushy. 5 minutes later my phone vibrated. A message from Bradley: "Sorry, can't talk now. I'll call later." Even those dry words brought some relief. At least he wasn't ignoring me completely. But the uncertainty still weighed heavily. I decided that the best cure for anxious thoughts was work. I buried myself in reports, held a few meetings, drafted a development plan for the next quarter. But even in the busiest moments, thoughts of Bradley never left me. I got home late, around 10 in the evening. I reheated leftovers from yesterday's dinner, poured myself a glass of wine, and put on soft classical music. That was always my ritual when I needed to calm down and put my thoughts in order. At midnight, as I was getting ready for bed, the phone rang. Bradley. "Hi," he said. His voice sounded tired. "Sorry it's so late. I was busy all day." "That's all right," I replied, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "I'm just glad you called." "Can we meet tomorrow?" he asked after a short pause. "We need to talk." "Of course," I agreed quickly. "Where and when?" "Come to my place. 7 in the evening, does that work for you?" "Yes, perfectly." I felt my heart start to beat faster. "Bradley. Thank you for giving me a chance to explain." "We'll talk tomorrow," he answered evasively. "Good night, Megan." "Good night," I echoed, but he had already hung up. That night's sleep was even more restless than the previous one. I woke up every hour, checking the time on my phone, afraid I would oversleep, even though there were still many hours until the meeting. In the morning I spent a long time choosing what to wear. Before, I had never given it much importance, but today everything was different. In the end, I chose a simple yet elegant dress of mid-range price. Not too expensive, not too cheap. Minimal makeup, no flashy accessories. I wanted Bradley to see the real me, without embellishment or status on display. The day dragged on painfully slowly. I tried to occupy myself with work, but my thoughts constantly returned to the conversation ahead. What would I say? How would I explain my behavior? Would he be able to understand and forgive? By 6 in the evening I could no longer sit still. I decided to leave early and walk to gather my thoughts. The weather was perfect for it, a warm May evening, a light breeze, trees blooming along the streets. I reached Bradley's building in half an hour. Now I had to decide what to do next. Arriving early would seem impolite, but wandering the neighborhood wasn't appealing either. In the end, I went into a small cafe across the street from his building and ordered tea. Exactly at 7 I went up to the 3rd floor and rang the familiar doorbell. My heart was pounding so hard it seemed its beats could be heard in the hallway. Bradley opened almost immediately. He looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes, as if he too hadn't slept well these past days. "Hi," he said, stepping aside to let me in. "Come in." I entered the apartment that was so familiar to me. Nothing had changed. The same bookshelves, the same photographs on the walls, the same collection of vinyl records. Only the atmosphere was different, tense, uneasy. "Tea? Coffee?" Bradley offered as he walked into the kitchen. "Tea, if you don't mind," I replied, following him. We sat at the small kitchen table across from each other. Bradley silently made tea, took out cups, a sugar bowl. All his movements seemed mechanical, detached. So, he finally began once the tea was poured into the cups. "I've thought a lot about what happened." I nodded, not daring to interrupt. "And you know what bothers me most? Not that you're wealthy. Not that you own your own business. Not even that you hid it from me. What hurts most is that you didn't trust me enough to be honest." "I understand," I said softly. "And I'm truly sorry." 2 years, Megan," he looked straight into my eyes. 2 years of a relationship. And all that time you were playing a role, pretending to be someone else. "No, Bradley, that's not true," I shook my head. "I wasn't pretending. I just didn't reveal the whole truth about my financial situation. But in everything else I was myself. The conversations we had, the feelings I felt for you, all of it was real. But part of you was always hidden," he countered. "An important part. Your work, your home, your lifestyle, those are part of you too, aren't they?" I couldn't argue with that. He was right. "Yes, that's me too," I admitted. And I should have been open with you. But I was afraid. What were you afraid of? He leaned forward slightly. That I would love you for your money. Or the opposite, that I would feel inadequate next to a successful woman. Both, probably, I sighed. I haven't had the best experiences in the past. When men found out about my situation, they either started seeing only a wallet in me, or they felt uncomfortable, trying to prove they were more successful and wealthier. Bradley frowned, thinking over my words. And you decided I was the same as them? He asked after a pause. No, I answered quickly. No, of course not. You always seemed different to me. Deeper, more genuine. A man for whom money isn't the most important thing in life. Then why didn't you trust me? His voice grew softer. Because I was afraid, I admitted honestly. Afraid of destroying what we had. With you I felt so good, so comfortable. You saw me as just Megan, not as a successful businesswoman with money. And I was afraid that if I told the truth, everything would change. And yesterday. Why did you put on that show in front of my parents? I lowered my eyes, feeling the heat of shame flush my cheeks. It was a foolish idea, I confessed. I wanted to see how they would react to a girl of very modest means. To test if they were snobs. But now I understand how ridiculous and offensive it was, to them and to you. Yes, it was ridiculous, Bradley agreed. My parents have never judged people by money or status. And the fact that you suspected them of that, it's hurtful, Megan. I know, I lifted my eyes to him. And I deeply regret it. Your parents turned out to be wonderful people. They accepted me as I presented myself, were kind and attentive. And I'm ashamed that I deceived them. Bradley was silent, turning the teacup in his hands. I had no idea what he was thinking, and that frightened me. What now? I dared to ask. Do you still want to be with me? He raised his eyes, and I saw in them a mix of emotions, pain, disappointment, but also something else. Something that looked like hope. I love you, Megan, he said after a long pause. That hasn't changed. But I need to know this will never happen again. That you'll be honest with me about everything. Even if the truth feels uncomfortable or frightening. I promise, I said quickly, feeling relief lift from my heart. I promise I'll never hide anything from you again. No secrets, no half-truths. And one more thing, he added, we'll need to tell my parents the truth. They deserve to know who you really are. I nodded in agreement. Of course. I'll tell them everything. I'll apologize for lying and explain my motives. If they find it possible to forgive you, they will, Bradley said with confidence. They'll understand. But it has to be soon. I don't want this lie hanging between us. Agreed, I reached my hand across the table, and to my relief he took it. I love you, Bradley. And I'll do everything to earn your trust again. He gave my hand a light squeeze. And I'll try to understand your fears and doubts. And I'll do everything so they never come back. That evening we talked for a long time. About the past, the future, our fears and our hopes. I told him the whole truth about my life, about how I started my business, about my successes and failures, about the apartments and accounts, about past relationships that had made me so cautious. Bradley listened attentively, asked questions, sometimes was surprised, sometimes laughed at my stories. I felt with every word the wall between us grew thinner, that the trust and understanding that had always been the foundation of our relationship was returning. It was long past midnight when we finally decided it was time to sleep. Bradley suggested I stay at his place, and I agreed. For the first time in 2 days I felt calm and certain about the future. In the morning we decided that we would go to his parents the next day. I was nervous thinking about that conversation, but I knew it was necessary. The truth had to be spoken, no matter how uncomfortable it might be. On Saturday we drove to his parents' house in the suburbs. On the way, I silently rehearsed my speech, searching for the words that could explain my strange behavior without insulting their feelings. When we pulled up to the house, I realized I was clenching my hands so tightly that my nails dug into my palms. Bradley, as if sensing my state, placed his hand over mine. "It will be all right," he said gently. "They'll understand." I nodded, unable to find words, and we got out of the car. Phyllis opened the door, and her face lit up with a smile at the sight of her son. "Bradley." "Megan." What a pleasant surprise. She hugged us both. Come in, come in. Donald has just made tea." We went into the living room, where Donald was already setting cups on the table. Seeing us, he put the teapot aside and came over to greet us. "I didn't expect you today," he said, shaking his son's hand and kissing me on the cheek. "But I'm always glad to see you." We sat down at the table, and Phyllis began pouring the tea. I felt my heart beating faster and faster. The moment of truth was drawing near. "Mom, Dad," Bradley began, once all the cups were filled. "We came because Megan has something she wants to tell you. Something important." His parents exchanged glances, and I noticed a flicker of worry in their eyes. "Has something happened?" Phyllis asked carefully. "No, nothing bad," I took a deep breath, summoning my courage. "It's just, I need to confess something to you. And ask for forgiveness." Now they looked at me with clear concern. I knew I had to speak plainly, without evasion. "Last time we met, I wasn't completely honest with you," I began. "In fact, I told you a lot of untruths about myself. About my work, about my housing, about my financial situation." "What do you mean?" Donald frowned. "I don't work as an assistant in a small firm," I confessed. "I own my own consulting company. A fairly successful company with offices in several cities." Phyllis raised her eyebrows in surprise. "Really?" "Yes," I nodded. "I don't live in a rented room. I have my own apartment in Manhattan. And 2 more apartments that I rent out. And a house outside the city." "But why did you tell us you lived in a rented room?" Donald asked in bewilderment. "Why all this deception?" I lowered my eyes, feeling the heat of shame spread across my cheeks. "I wanted to see how you would react to a girl of very modest means," I answered quietly. "I wanted to know if you would accept me if I wasn't well off." Silence fell. I didn't dare raise my eyes, afraid I would see disappointment or anger on Bradley's parents' faces. "Megan thought you might be snobs," Bradley explained. "That status and money might matter to you." "Oh, my dear," Phyllis's voice was gentle, without a trace of judgment. "Is that really the impression we gave you?" I lifted my eyes and to my surprise saw her smiling. Not angrily, not condescendingly, but with understanding. "No, not at all," I rushed to assure her. "You were so kind, so attentive. That's exactly why I feel so ashamed of my deception. You didn't deserve to be treated that way." "You know," Donald said thoughtfully, "when I was a young professor at the university, I went through something very similar." "Really?" Bradley asked in surprise. "Yes," his father nodded. "I was just starting my career, earning a modest salary. And Phyllis was already an established doctor, working in a prestigious clinic. When we met, I hesitated for a long time before asking her out. I was afraid she'd laugh at my limited means." "And what happened?" I asked, drawn in by his story. "Well, I was the one who invited him," Phyllis smiled. "Because I liked him. Not his money, not his status, him. His mind, his kindness, his sense of humor. I didn't care at all how much he earned. And since then I've understood one important thing, Donald continued. True feelings don't depend on money. Not positively, not negatively. If someone loves you, they love you, not your wallet. And if you love someone, you love them, not their financial position. I felt tears well up in my eyes. These people I had been so afraid of disappointing were now showing such understanding, such wisdom. Thank you, I said, barely holding back my emotions. Thank you for not being angry with me. Why would we be angry? Phyllis asked softly. Because you were afraid of being rejected. That's such a human feeling. We all fear sometimes being misunderstood, rejected, judged. But I still must apologize, I insisted. What I did was wrong. I lied to you, I put you in an awkward position. And I am very, very sorry for that. We accept your apology, Donald said simply. And we hope that in the future there will be only truth between us, however uncomfortable it might be. I promise, I looked at him gratefully. Good, Phyllis clapped her hands, shifting the conversation to a lighter note. Now tell us about your company. What exactly do you do? It sounds so interesting. And I told them. About how I started my business, about the struggles and successes, about my plans for the future. They listened with genuine interest, asked questions, shared their own thoughts. Bradley joined in the conversation too, and the atmosphere gradually grew more relaxed and friendly. To my surprise, Donald turned out to be not only a historian but also a great enthusiast of economics. We had an animated discussion about modern business trends, talked about the impact of digitalization on the economy, debated the prospects of various industries. Phyllis was more interested in the practical side of my work. How do I manage my team? Is it difficult to be a woman in leadership? How do I cope with stress? Her questions were smart and precise, and I answered them with pleasure. Time flew by unnoticed. When I looked at the clock, it was already well past noon. We had spent nearly 5 hours with Bradley's parents, and all that time I felt accepted, not for money or status, but for who I truly was. We should probably go, Bradley said when he noticed me checking the time. Megan has another meeting today. It was true. I had arranged a business dinner with a potential partner and couldn't cancel it. Of course, Phyllis nodded. But you'll come again, won't you? Maybe next weekend. I'll cook something special. With pleasure, I answered sincerely. If you don't mind. We'd be delighted, Donald assured me. Megan, thank you for being honest with us today. It means a lot. I felt a lump rise in my throat. These people I had been so afraid of disappointing turned out to be so wise and understanding. How could I ever have doubted them? As we said goodbye, Phyllis hugged me tightly and whispered in my ear, "We're glad our son chose such a smart and brave girl. Money has nothing to do with it." In the car on the way home, I felt an extraordinary lightness. As if the heavy burden I had carried on my shoulders for so many years had finally fallen away. "Well, how do you feel?" Bradley asked, giving me a quick glance. "Liberated," I answered honestly. "Your parents, they are amazing people." "I told you," he smiled. "They've always been that way, accepting, understanding, wise. I've learned a lot from them." "I can see that," I nodded. "I'm so grateful they didn't turn away from me after everything I did." "They're not that kind of people," Bradley said simply. "They see a person's heart, not their mistakes." We drove in silence for a while, each lost in thought. I thought about how much my life had changed in just a few days. How fears and mistrust had almost destroyed the most precious thing I had. And how important honesty was, honesty with others and with myself. "You know," Bradley broke the silence, "I've been thinking. Since we've decided to be completely honest with each other, there's something I need to tell you. I tensed. What else could there be? What secrets could Bradley, this open, honest man, possibly have? What do you mean? I asked, trying to keep my voice calm. About my work, he gave me a quick glance. I'm not exactly just an ordinary architect, as you may have thought. And who are you then? I was intrigued. I'm a partner in the architecture firm, he admitted. One of the 3 founders. And our firm isn't that small. We specialize in sustainable projects, and we've built quite a strong reputation in that field. But why did you never mention this? I asked in surprise. For the same reason you didn't, I suppose, he shrugged slightly. I didn't want my status to influence our relationship. I wanted you to see me, not my title or my income. I could hardly believe my ears. All this time we had both been hiding our real status from each other, afraid the truth would change our relationship. We're perfect for each other, I laughed. 2 conspirators. Looks like it, Bradley smiled. But from now on, no more secrets, agreed. Agreed, I reached out my hand, and for a moment he let go of the wheel to squeeze it. At that moment I realized my fears had been pointless. Bradley loved me not for money and not despite it. He loved me for who I was. For my thoughts, my feelings, my dreams, for what made me me, regardless of the size of my bank account. And I loved him the same way. Not for his status or position, but for his kindness, his mind, his sense of humor, for the way he saw the world, for the warmth of his hands and the tenderness of his smile. Our experiment, which could have ended in disaster, in the end only strengthened our relationship. Because true love endures tests, even strange and ridiculous ones like those we created for ourselves. Ahead of us lay a wedding, a life together, many new trials and joys. But now I knew we would go through all of it together, with the honesty and trust that had become the foundation of our relationship. Bradley's parents became like a second family to me. Wise, understanding, they taught me many things. Above all, that real feelings do not depend on money or status. That one can be successful and strong without hiding behind a mask or concealing achievements. That trust and honesty are the foundation on which all healthy relationships are built. I no longer hid my success. Not that I flaunted it, but I stopped pretending to be less than I was. And surprisingly, the world didn't collapse. People didn't start treating me differently. Those who valued me for who I was continued to do so. And those who saw only a wallet, well, their opinion no longer mattered to me. My grandmother had been right when she told me about the importance of financial independence. But she had forgotten to mention something else: money is only a tool, nothing more. It can make life more comfortable, but it cannot replace true love, genuine relationships, trust, and understanding. It was those intangible values that became my greatest wealth. Wealth that cannot be measured in dollars, but that makes life truly full and happy. Only now, looking back, do I understand how much I had risked by staging that test for Bradley's parents. Pretending to be a poor girl from a small town, I could have lost everything: his love, his trust, our future. And for what? For a foolish experiment, built on fears and prejudices. This is a lesson I will probably remember for the rest of my life. Honesty is not just a moral quality, but a practical necessity for anyone who wants to build healthy, lasting relationships. Because love and trust, like fragile plants, need care and honesty to blossom fully. My story could have ended very differently, with tears, separation, a broken heart. But thanks to the wisdom and understanding of Bradley and his parents, it had a happy ending. Or rather, a happy beginning, the beginning of a new life, built on truth, trust, and unconditional love. And every time I look at my engagement ring, I remember that lesson and promise myself never again to let fear and doubt come between me and the people I love. Because true love deserves true honesty, always and in everything. Now, years later, I can say with certainty, my greatest wealth is not in bank accounts or real estate, but in the people who love me as I am. With all my strengths and weaknesses, successes and mistakes. And that is wealth I would never trade for any amount of money in the world. Because in the end, what matters is not how much money you have, but how much happiness and love there is in your life. And in that sense, I am the richest person in the world. The next few weeks flew by like a dream. Bradley and I, finally freed from the burden of secrets and half-truths, enjoyed a new level of closeness and understanding. I introduced him to my real world, showed him my company's office, introduced him to key employees, invited him to my spacious country house that I had once kept hidden. Bradley, in turn, told me more about his work at the architecture firm, about projects he was proud of, about plans for the future. We decided not to delay the wedding. We set a date for the end of August, just 3 months away. The time was short, but thanks to my organizational skills and connections, preparations were already well underway. We decided the ceremony would not be too lavish, but elegant and stylish. The guest list was limited to close friends and family, about 50 people in total. "We need to introduce your parents to mine," Bradley said one day as we were discussing the details of the upcoming celebration. "Maybe we could arrange a joint dinner." I liked the idea, though it also made me a little uneasy. My parents, simple people though they were, might feel awkward in the company of a history professor and a doctor. But Bradley assured me that his parents knew how to connect with all kinds of people and would never let anyone feel uncomfortable. "Don't worry so much," he said, noticing my unease. "Everything will be fine. I'm sure they'll find plenty to talk about." I nodded, trying to look confident, though inside I was still nervous. After that incident with my pretending, I had become much more cautious with my expectations and fears. We decided to host the dinner at a restaurant so that no one would feel like a guest or a host. We chose a small but refined place with American cuisine, not too expensive, so my parents wouldn't feel uncomfortable, but nice enough to make a good impression. Before the meeting, I called my mother and asked her not to feel shy and to just be herself. "They're just ordinary people, Mom," I assured her. "Very kind and understanding. You have nothing to worry about." My mother, always calm and level-headed, only chuckled. "Daughter, don't you worry yourself. I may be just a provincial schoolteacher, but I know how to talk to people. Don't worry about me and your father." On the appointed day, Bradley and I arrived at the restaurant first, to greet both families. I chose for the occasion an elegant but not ostentatiously expensive cream-colored dress. I wanted to look good, but not outshine my mother, who had always felt self-conscious about her wardrobe. Bradley's parents arrived right on time. Phyllis wore a simple but elegant gray suit, Donald a classic tweed jacket and trousers. They looked relaxed and welcoming. "Megan, dear," Phyllis embraced me like family. "How are you? You must be busy morning till night with all the wedding preparations." "A little," I smiled. "But I enjoy the process." My parents were 15 minutes late, which was typical for them. My father, a sturdy man with a sun-darkened face from years of working outdoors, looked slightly uncertain in his best suit. My mother, in a simple but neat dress, carried herself with dignity, though I noticed how she nervously adjusted her hair. "Mom, Dad," I hurried to greet them. "Meet Bradley's parents, Phyllis and Donald." "Very nice to meet you," my mother said, extending her hand. "Bridget," she introduced herself. "Robert," my father said, firmly shaking Donald's hand. "Pleased to meet you." To my relief, the introductions went smoothly. We sat down, and after a little initial awkwardness, the conversation began to flow more easily. It turned out that Donald had worked in a factory in his youth before going into academia, and he and my father quickly found common ground. My mother and Phyllis soon became engrossed in a discussion about school education. "Your daughter is an amazingly determined and talented young woman," Phyllis told my mother. "You must be very proud of her." "Yes," my mother smiled warmly. "Megan has always been special. Even as a child she always knew what she wanted and worked toward it." "That's a wonderful quality," Phyllis nodded. "So few young people nowadays are truly willing to work hard for success. Most want everything immediately, without effort." "Megan's not like that," my father joined in. "She was never afraid of hard work. She'd spend nights poring over her textbooks, and I'd tell her, 'Rest, get some sleep.' But she would just shake her head, 'No, Dad, I need to learn all of this.'" I felt my cheeks flush. My parents spoke of me with such pride and love that it made me a little embarrassed. "And Bradley was a dreamer as a child," Phyllis shared. "Always drawing, building something. I remember when you built an entire city out of boxes in your room. It was impossible to live in there, everything was taken up, but we couldn't bring ourselves to tear it down for a whole month." Bradley laughed. "Yes, I remember that city. I even wired electricity into it from a desk lamp. Created real street lighting." "Even then it was clear he would become an architect," Donald said with pride. "A creative spirit, but with a practical streak." The evening went on, and I watched with relief as our parents found common ground despite differences in education and social standing. They were simply people, united by love for their children and a wish for their happiness. When it was time to leave, we all exchanged warm farewells. Phyllis hugged my mother and invited my parents to their country house the following weekend. "It's beautiful there right now. Everything's in bloom. And Donald makes an amazing barbecue," she said. "We'd love to come," my mother replied, and I could see she was genuinely pleased by the invitation. On the way home I felt a huge sense of relief. Another barrier had been overcome, another fear proved unfounded. Our families had found a common language, and it was wonderful. "See? I told you everything would be fine," Bradley said, as if reading my thoughts. "Your parents are wonderful people. Simple, genuine, with dignity. My parents really liked them. And I liked yours," I admitted. "They know how to connect with anyone, make them feel comfortable. That's a rare gift." "Yes, they're masters at it," Bradley agreed. "Years of working with people, my father with students, my mother with patients. They've learned how to understand people and find common ground." We fell silent for a while, each lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Bradley said, "You know, I'm so glad all those misunderstandings are behind us. That now there are no more secrets or half-truths between us. It's so much better this way, isn't it?" "It is," I nodded, though somewhere deep inside there still lived a fear. A fear that my lie might have consequences, that not everything could be forgiven and forgotten so easily. But I pushed those thoughts away. Right now everything was good, and I wanted to savor this moment. Preparations for the wedding were in full swing. I chose a simple but elegant dress by a well-known designer, ordered flowers, and finalized the banquet menu. Bradley left the organization almost entirely to me, only occasionally voicing his wishes. One day, while going over the guest list, he suddenly said, "Megan, I want to invite Daniel to the wedding. You don't mind, do you?" "Daniel?" I frowned, trying to recall if he had ever mentioned him before. "Is he your friend? You've never spoken of him." Bradley hesitated a little. "We studied together at university. Later we worked in the same company. He's an old friend, though in recent years we haven't kept in close touch." "Of course, invite him," I agreed easily. "It's your wedding too. You can invite whoever you want." Bradley smiled with relief, and I thought he must have been expecting objections from me. "Thanks. Daniel lives in Boston now, but I'm sure he'll come." After all, we've been friends for 15 years. 15 years. And you never told me about him. I was genuinely surprised now. It just never came up, Bradley shrugged. And like I said, we haven't been in close contact these last few years. He moved to Boston 5 years ago, got married, has his own life. I nodded, though I was slightly unsettled by the fact that Bradley had never mentioned such, apparently, an important person in his life. But then I reminded myself that I, too, hadn't told him much about my own friends and acquaintances. Everyone has the right to their own private space and past. July turned out to be especially hot. In New York, the 95-degree heat turned the city into a blazing skillet. I spent much of my time at the office, where, thankfully, the air conditioners worked. There was a lot to do: the end of the quarter, new projects, client meetings. Despite the upcoming wedding, I couldn't allow myself to neglect the business. On one of those sweltering days, I stayed late at the office finishing an important report for a major client. By the time I was finally done and stepped outside, it was already around 10 in the evening. The air had begun to cool ever so slightly, and it was a little easier to breathe. I decided to walk to the nearest subway station to clear my head after the long day at the office. The streets were half empty. Most people had either left the city for the weekend or stayed home, hiding from the heat. Passing by a small cafe with a summer terrace, I heard familiar laughter. Turning my head, I saw Bradley sitting at a table with a man I didn't know. They were chatting animatedly, and Bradley looked relaxed and cheerful. I slowed down, wondering if I should go over. On one hand, I didn't want to intrude on their meeting. On the other, it would have been strange to just pass by, pretending not to notice my fiancé. While I hesitated, Bradley lifted his eyes and saw me. For a brief instant, his expression changed. I thought I caught a flicker of something like alarm. But he quickly pulled himself together and waved, inviting me to join them. "Megan." "What a surprise," he said, standing up to greet me. "Meet Daniel, the friend I told you about." "Dan, this is Megan, my fiancé." Daniel, a dark-haired man about Bradley's age, stood up and offered me his hand. "Pleasure to meet you," he said with a slight smile. "Bradley has told me a lot about you." "Nice to meet you too," I replied, shaking his hand. "Although I must admit, Bradley only mentioned you very recently." "Really?" Daniel gave Bradley a quick glance. "Well, we haven't seen each other in a long time. I came to New York on business and thought I'd call an old friend. Didn't expect him to be getting married so soon. Please, join us." He gestured toward an empty chair. "You must be coming from work. You look tired." "Yes, I stayed late at the office." I sat down, feeling a faint tension in the air. I was finishing a quarterly report for a client. "Megan runs her own consulting company," Bradley explained to Daniel. "Impressive," Daniel nodded. "What area of consulting do you specialize in?" "We help companies optimize expenses, develop growth strategies, and advise on taxation." "Interesting." Daniel took a sip of wine from his glass. "I also work in finance. An analyst at an investment firm." "In Boston?" I asked, recalling that Bradley had mentioned his friend's move. "Yes, 5 years now," Daniel confirmed. "After my divorce, I decided I needed a change." "Divorce?" I shot a quick glance at Bradley. "I thought Bradley said you were married." An awkward pause followed. Daniel looked at Bradley with mild puzzlement, while Bradley looked embarrassed. "I must have misspoken," Bradley finally said. "Daniel was married, but he got divorced 2 years ago." "Didn't work out," Daniel shrugged with feigned nonchalance. "It happens." The conversation continued, but I couldn't shake a certain unease, as though I had interrupted an important discussion by showing up. Bradley seemed a bit tense, though he tried not to show it. Daniel was polite but distant, as if he were evaluating me. After half an hour of this strained interaction, I decided it was time to leave. I think I should head home, I said, rising. It's been a long day, and tomorrow will be busy. I'll walk you, Bradley offered immediately. No need, I gently stopped him. You and Daniel probably haven't seen each other in a long time, you must have a lot to catch up on. I'll call a taxi, don't worry. You're sure? Bradley looked slightly concerned. Absolutely, I smiled, trying to appear at ease. It was nice meeting you, Daniel. I hope to see you at our wedding. I'll be there, Daniel nodded. Your best friend doesn't get married every day. I said goodbye and headed toward the exit of the terrace, pulling out my phone to call a cab. As I walked away, I heard Daniel say something that made Bradley laugh. Looking back, I saw them once again deep in conversation, as if my brief visit had never happened. On the way home, I reflected on the strange impression the meeting had left on me. Something about Daniel, and about Bradley's reaction to my appearance, bothered me. Why had Bradley never mentioned his best friend until just recently? Why had he been wrong about his marital status? And why did there seem to be an unspoken undercurrent in their conversation? I reminded myself that after everything that had happened recently, I had promised Bradley I would trust him and not build assumptions out of nothing. Perhaps they really were just old friends who hadn't seen each other in years and were simply enjoying the chance to reminisce. There was nothing suspicious or strange about that. And yet, as I fell asleep that night, I couldn't shake a vague sense of unease. As if into the perfect puzzle of our life together, a piece from another picture had suddenly been forced in, breaking the harmony and making me wonder what else might not match the image I had in my head. The next morning, when I woke up, I found a message from Bradley. Good morning, my love. Daniel came unexpectedly, and I couldn't refuse to meet him. I hope you're not upset. I love you. I replied that everything was fine and there was nothing to be upset about. After all, Bradley had every right to meet his friends, even if he hadn't told me about them before. The day passed in the usual work hustle. In the evening, Bradley picked me up from the office, and we went to a restaurant where we were supposed to discuss the menu for the wedding banquet. He was especially attentive and affectionate, as if trying to smooth over some hidden guilt. We carefully went over the dishes, chose the wines, clarified the details of the table setting. When the business part was done and we were simply enjoying dinner, I decided to ask, Bradley, tell me more about Daniel. Are you really close friends? He hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Yes, we've been friends since college. We were almost inseparable at one point. Then life took us in different directions. He moved to Boston, I stayed in New York. We mostly kept in touch by phone, and even that rarely. Why did you never mention him? I asked directly. Bradley shrugged. I don't know. It just never came up. And our friendship in recent years hasn't been at its strongest. After his divorce, Daniel became a bit withdrawn. Rarely reached out. I nodded, accepting the explanation, though it didn't entirely ease my doubts. And why did you say he was married? I said that. Bradley looked genuinely surprised. Really? I must have just forgotten they divorced. Like I said, we haven't been in close contact lately. I see. I decided not to push the topic any further. Maybe I really was making too much out of small details. In any case, he seemed to me like an interesting person. Smart. Yes, Daniel was always the smartest one in our group, Bradley smiled, as if recalling something pleasant. And the most level-headed. The rest of us were often drawn to adventures, and he was always the voice of reason. Though when he did decide to do something, he went all in. Is he staying long in New York? I asked. A couple of weeks, probably. He has some business meetings here. Bradley took a sip of wine. By the way, he suggested we go out together over the weekend. You don't mind, do you? I thought for a moment. On the one hand, I was curious to learn more about Bradley's friend. On the other, I couldn't shake the strange feeling that there was something in their relationship I didn't quite understand. No, I don't mind, I finally decided. It would be interesting to get to know him better. Perfect, Bradley brightened noticeably. Then I'll tell him we're in. Maybe we'll try that new restaurant in Soho. You said you wanted to. Yes, good idea, I agreed, though my appetite had somehow vanished. The rest of the week went by in the usual routine: work, client meetings, wedding preparations. Bradley saw Daniel a few more times, but always told me in advance. I didn't object. How could I forbid him from meeting his friends? On Saturday, as planned, we went to the restaurant where we were meeting Daniel. I wore a light sand-colored summer dress. Bradley was in light trousers and a shirt. The weather was perfect, a warm summer evening with a gentle breeze that brought long-awaited relief after the day's heat. Daniel was already waiting at a table on the open terrace. When we arrived, he stood up and gallantly kissed my hand, a slightly old-fashioned but pleasant gesture. You look wonderful, Megan, he said with a smile. Now I see why Bradley is in such a hurry to get to the altar. Thank you, I smiled in return, deciding to accept the compliment. You look great too. And it was true. In a light linen suit, with a slight tan, Daniel looked elegant and attractive. I thought I could understand why he and Bradley had been friends. Both possessed that calm, confident charm that didn't immediately jump out but certainly drew attention. We sat down and ordered an apéritif. At first the conversation circled around general topics: weather, the restaurant, the latest news. Then Daniel asked about my work, and I told him a little about my company and the projects I was currently involved in. He listened attentively, asked thoughtful questions, showing genuine interest and understanding of the subject. And you, I heard, work as an analyst at an investment firm. I asked when the talk of my work had run its course. Yes, 7 years now, Daniel nodded. First in the New York office, then I transferred to Boston. And how do you like Boston compared to New York? A different pace, a different atmosphere, he said thoughtfully. New York is constant movement, hustle, ambition. Boston is calmer, more intellectual, I suppose. I feel comfortable there. Daniel was always a bit of a Bostonian at heart, Bradley interjected. Even when we were studying in New York, he often said that one day he'd move to Boston. That's true, Daniel nodded. I always felt Boston was my city. Though I love New York too. Many dear people remain here. He cast a quick glance at Bradley, and it seemed to me there was something particular in that look. A certain intimacy, something only the two of them understood. And how did you meet Bradley? I asked, trying to diffuse the strange tension that had suddenly arisen. Oh, that was an epic story, Daniel laughed. First day of university. I was a provincial boy, just arrived in New York, lost in the corridors of the main building. Bradley, a born New Yorker, deigned to show me the way to the right classroom. We've been friends ever since. Don't undersell yourself, Bradley objected. You were the smartest in the course. The professors adored you. But not the most practical, Daniel countered. Remember how you practically saved my diploma when I got carried away with that artist and nearly missed the submission deadline? I remember, Bradley smiled, but somehow a little stiffly. Eric, wasn't his name? Yes, Eric, Daniel nodded, and for a moment his eyes clouded over, as if recalling something distant and sad. He was an interesting person. What happened to him? I asked, sensing that there was more to the story than just memories of student days. He moved to France, Daniel answered briefly. Last I heard of him was about 3 years ago. Apparently, he settled there successfully, exhibiting in galleries. The conversation shifted back to more general topics. We talked about movies, books, travel. Daniel turned out to be an engaging conversationalist, well-read, with a good sense of humor, able to listen and keep the conversation flowing. I began to understand why Bradley valued his friendships so much. After dinner, Daniel suggested a walk through the evening city. The weather was perfect for it, and we agreed. We wandered down old streets, talking about the beauty of the architecture, about how the city was changing. Daniel and Bradley reminisced about their student years, the places where they loved to spend time. At one point we reached a small square where a street musician was playing. The sound of a guitar carried through the evening air, creating a special, romantic atmosphere. "Shall we dance?" Bradley asked, holding out his hand. I nodded, and we swayed in a slow dance to the gentle melody. Out of the corner of my eye I noticed Daniel watching us, his expression strange, thoughtful, almost sad. When the music ended, Daniel applauded along with the other bystanders. "You two look wonderful together," he said with a smile. "A real couple." "Thank you," Bradley pulled me close by the shoulders. "I'm the happiest man in the world." "That much is obvious," Daniel nodded. "And that's a beautiful thing." The evening ended on the same warm, friendly note. Daniel thanked us for the company, promised he would definitely come to the wedding, and wished us happiness. We parted at the entrance to the subway. Daniel was staying at a hotel near the center and declined our offer to drive him. On the way home I reflected on the evening. Daniel had made a good impression on me, intelligent, courteous, tactful. And yet, something in his relationship with Bradley still seemed odd. A certain vagueness, some unspoken secret they shared. "What are you thinking about?" Bradley asked, noticing my silence. "Oh, nothing special," I waved it off. "Just a little tired. It's been a full day." "Did you like Daniel?" There was a touch of anxiety in his voice, as if my opinion mattered deeply to him. "Yes, very much," I replied honestly. "An interesting, intelligent man. I'm glad I met him." "That's good," Bradley relaxed noticeably. "He thinks highly of you too. He said I made the right choice." "Really?" I couldn't hide my surprise. "When did he tell you that?" "While you were in the restroom at the restaurant," Bradley explained. "It was important to him that I know he approves of my choice." "How sweet of him," I tried to keep my voice casual. "His opinion means a lot to you, doesn't it?" "Yes," Bradley said simply. "Daniel isn't just a friend. He's someone I could always trust, who was always there in difficult times. His opinion really matters to me." I nodded, not knowing what else to say. It felt strange to be learning about such an important person in Bradley's life only now, when we were already preparing for our wedding. But I reminded myself that everyone has a right to their past, to relationships that shaped them as individuals. At home we went about our usual evening routine, took a shower, had tea on the balcony, talked about plans for the next day. Everything was as it had always been, and yet I felt something had changed. As if Daniel's appearance had revealed a new facet of Bradley, a side I hadn't noticed before. The next few days passed in their usual rhythm: work, wedding preparations, meetings with friends and relatives. Daniel's name no longer came up in our conversations, and I decided not to raise the subject myself. If Bradley wanted to tell me more about his friend, he would do so on his own. On Friday I had an important meeting with a potential client, a large manufacturing company looking for a financial consultant to optimize their processes. The meeting went well, and I was returning to the office in high spirits. If everything worked out, this contract could become one of the biggest in my company's history. As I passed a small cafe near the office, I suddenly noticed a familiar figure. At a table by the window sat Daniel, absorbed in reading some documents. He was alone, with a cup of coffee and a stack of papers in front of him. I hesitated, deciding whether to go in. On the one hand, it would be impolite to just pass by pretending not to notice him. On the other, he looked busy, and I didn't want to interrupt. While I wavered, Daniel looked up from his documents and saw me. Surprise flickered across his face, then he smiled and waved, inviting me to join him. "Megan, what a pleasant surprise," he said, standing to greet me. "Sit down, keep me company." "Hello, Daniel," I smiled in return. "I didn't want to disturb you, you looked so focused." "You're not disturbing me," he pushed the papers aside. "I was just about to take a break. Business documents can wait, but good company is rare." I sat down across from him, and a waitress immediately came to take my order. I asked for green tea. The day was hot, and coffee was the last thing I wanted. "How's the wedding planning going?" Daniel asked once the waitress had left. "Good, thank you," I nodded gratefully. "Just a few last details to sort out." "Bradley looks happy," Daniel noted. I haven't seen him so calm and confident in a long time. "Really?" I was surprised. "And what was he like before?" Daniel paused, as if choosing his words. "More restless, I suppose. Searching. Bradley has always been the kind of person who needs something to believe in, someone to trust. And not all of his choices were fortunate ones." "You mean his past relationships?" I asked carefully. "That too," Daniel replied evasively. "Bradley is a complex person, Megan. More complex than he might appear at first glance. That's one of the reasons I love him," I said sincerely. "His depth, his capacity for reflection." "Yes, that's what makes him special," Daniel agreed. "But sometimes that depth becomes a whirlpool he can drown in himself." I frowned, not quite understanding what he was getting at. "What do you mean?" Daniel sighed. "Just take care of him, all right? Bradley may seem strong and confident, but inside he's very vulnerable. Especially when it comes to the people he loves." "I know," I nodded. "And I would never hurt him intentionally." "I believe you," Daniel gave a faint smile. "You know, when Bradley first told me about you, I was skeptical. I thought it was just another infatuation that would pass. But now, having met you, I see he made the right choice." "Thank you," I felt my cheeks flush. For some reason, his approval mattered to me, even though I barely knew this man. "No need to thank me," he took a sip of coffee. "Just answer me one thing. Do you really love him? Not his status, not his looks, but him. With all his flaws and weaknesses." The bluntness of the question caught me off guard. "Yes," I answered firmly after a brief pause. "I love Bradley as he is. With all his complexities and contradictions. I'm not looking for a perfect man, I've found the one who's perfect for me." Daniel studied me intently, as if weighing the sincerity of my words. Finally, he nodded. "Good. That's all I wanted to know." Our conversation drifted to more neutral topics. Daniel asked about my work, about my plans for the future, and shared his impressions of the changes in New York during the years he'd lived in Boston. He turned out to be a pleasant conversationalist, someone who knew how to listen and ask the right questions. When I glanced at my watch, I was surprised to see I'd spent almost an hour in his company. "I should get back to the office," I said, gathering my things. "It was nice talking with you, Daniel." "Likewise," he smiled. "And, Megan, thank you." "For what?" I asked, surprised. "For making Bradley happy," he said simply. "That matters to me." I nodded, unsure what to say to that. After saying goodbye, I headed toward the cafe's exit. At the door, I turned back and saw Daniel watching me with a complicated, unreadable expression. There was something in his gaze that once again made me wonder about the true nature of his relationship with Bradley. Back at the office, I tried to focus on work, but my thoughts kept drifting back to my conversation with Daniel. What had he meant about Bradley's whirlpool and vulnerability? Why did he care so deeply about my fiancé's happiness? And why did I feel he was withholding something important? At the end of the workday, I decided not to torment myself with guesses and simply ask Bradley directly. I called him and suggested we meet that evening. He agreed, and we arranged to have dinner at a small restaurant not far from my apartment. Bradley arrived looking slightly irritated. He'd had problems at work, a client was unhappy with a project and was demanding major changes on an impossibly short deadline. "Sorry, I'm not the best company tonight," he said as we sat down at a table. That client really threw me off balance. "It's all right," I gently squeezed his hand. "We can just have dinner, no need to talk much." He gave me a grateful smile, and we ordered food. For a while we ate in silence, enjoying the good cuisine and simply being together. Gradually, Bradley relaxed, and the tension faded from his face. "So, what did you want to talk about?" he asked once we'd finished the main course. "From the sound of your voice on the phone, it seemed important." I hesitated, unsure how best to begin. "I ran into Daniel today," I finally said. "We ended up talking." "Really?" Bradley looked slightly surprised. "And how did that go?" "Fine," I took a sip of wine, gathering my thoughts. "Daniel, he's an interesting person. And he seems to value your friendship a great deal." "It's mutual," Bradley nodded. "We've been through a lot together." He said something that made me think. I decided to get straight to the point. "That you're a complex person, more complex than you seem at first glance. And that sometimes your depth becomes a whirlpool you can drown in." Bradley froze, his expression stiffening for a moment. "He said that?" "Yes," I watched him closely. "What did he mean, Bradley?" He looked away, as if reluctant to meet my eyes. "Daniel has always had a taste for metaphors," he said after a pause. "Maybe he meant my habit of getting too absorbed in projects, forgetting about everything else." The explanation sounded plausible, but something in his tone, in his reluctance to look me in the eye, told me it wasn't the whole truth. "Or maybe he meant your emotional depth," I suggested softly. "Your ability to feel deeply, to form strong attachments to people." "Maybe," Bradley finally met my gaze. "Daniel has always thought I react too strongly to betrayal, to breakups. That I invest too much emotionally. Is that true?" I asked quietly. He thought for a moment. "Probably. I don't know how to love halfway, Megan. When I love, I give all of myself. And when I lose someone close, it's like a part of me dies." I reached out and squeezed his fingers. "I'll never betray you, Bradley. I'll never hurt you intentionally." "I know," he gave a faint smile. "That's why I want to be with you. Because you're someone I can trust." "And Daniel?" I asked cautiously. "Do you trust him too?" "Daniel is a special case." Bradley looked away again. "We've been through so much together. There were times when he was the only one who stood by me, who understood me. For example, I tried to keep my tone light, though unease was rising inside me." Bradley sighed. "Remember I told you not all my relationships were successful. There was one especially painful breakup a few years ago. Someone I trusted completely betrayed me. And Daniel was there, helping me through it." "I'm glad you had such a friend," I said sincerely. "Everyone needs someone to lean on in difficult times." "Yes," Bradley squeezed my hand. "But now I have you." And I know with you it will be different. I smiled, though a vague uneasiness still gnawed at me. Something about this story didn't add up. Something was still being left unsaid. Bradley, I began cautiously, is there something else I should know about you? About your past? Something that could affect our future? He looked at me for a long time, and in his eyes emotions wrestled that I couldn't quite decipher. Finally, he shook his head. No, Megan. Nothing that matters now. The past is the past. What's important is what we feel for each other now and what we'll feel in the future. I nodded, deciding not to press. Maybe he was right. Maybe it wasn't worth stirring up a past that no longer mattered. And yet, deep inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something I didn't know. Something that could explain Daniel's strange behavior and Bradley's reaction to my questions. We finished dinner, paid, and stepped outside. The evening was warm, and we decided to walk to my place. We walked in silence, holding hands, each lost in our own thoughts. At the entrance to my building, Bradley suddenly stopped and turned to me. Megan, I love you, he said with unexpected seriousness. More than anyone, ever. And I'll do everything to make you happy with me. I promise. There was such sincerity, such vulnerability in his eyes that for a moment all my doubts receded. I embraced him, pressing close, feeling his warmth, his strength, his love. I love you too, I whispered. And I believe you, Bradley. I believe you with all my heart. We went up to my apartment and spent the rest of the evening together, savoring our closeness and forgetting, for a while, all questions and doubts. In those moments, it felt as though nothing could come between us, that our love was stronger than any secrets of the past. And yet, as I fell asleep in Bradley's arms, I couldn't shake a strange premonition. As if a shadow loomed over our happiness, a shadow whose name I didn't yet know, but whose presence I already sensed. The next week passed in ordinary concerns, work, wedding preparations, meetings with friends and relatives. Daniel didn't appear and didn't call, and Bradley didn't mention him either. It seemed life had returned to its normal course. On Wednesday evening, Phyllis called me. She wanted to go over some details of the upcoming wedding, talk about seating arrangements, confirm their side of the guest list. We chatted pleasantly, and at the end of the conversation she suddenly asked, Megan, dear, I take it you've already met Daniel? Yes, I answered, a little surprised by the question. We've met a few times. He's a very interesting man. Yes, Daniel has always been special, there was a kind of tenderness in her voice. Bradley values his friendship so much. They've known each other for so many years. Yes, he told me. I hesitated, then decided to ask. Phyllis, do you know Daniel well? Of course, there was mild surprise in her voice. He practically lived at our house during their college years. His parents were abroad on a long assignment at the time, and he often stayed with us for holidays and vacations. He's like a second son to us. That piece of information gave me pause. If Daniel had been so close to Bradley's family, why had I never heard of him before? Why hadn't Bradley mentioned someone who was like a second son to his parents? You didn't know? Phyllis asked when she noticed my silence. No, I didn't, I admitted honestly. Bradley didn't really talk much about Daniel until recently. Strange, there was genuine surprise in her voice. They were so close. Of course, after what happened with Caroline their relationship cooled, but still. The incident with Caroline. I repeated, feeling tension coil inside me. Oh, Phyllis faltered. I thought you knew. Caroline was Bradley's girlfriend a few years ago. They even planned to get married. And then it turned out she was having an affair with Daniel. I felt my heart skip a beat. What? It was very hard for Bradley, Phyllis went on, clearly embarrassed that she'd revealed such information. He loved Caroline deeply, and the betrayal of his best friend, it was a blow. They didn't speak for almost 2 years after that. Then they reconciled, but the closeness was never the same. I stayed silent, trying to process what I had just heard. Daniel, the man Bradley introduced as his best friend, the man he said he trusted completely. That man had betrayed him, had taken his fiancée. "Megan, are you there?" Phyllis asked, concerned after my long pause. Yes, sorry, I tried to gather my thoughts. It's just, I didn't know about this. I'm sorry, dear, I shouldn't have mentioned it. There was genuine remorse in her voice. It's an old story, and Bradley must have preferred not to recall it. Please, don't tell him I told you. Don't worry, I answered automatically, though my mind was in chaos. I won't bring it up. We ended the conversation shortly after. Phyllis apologized again for her slip. I reassured her that everything was fine, and we said goodbye. But nothing was fine. I sat on the couch, clutching my phone, trying to make sense of it all. Bradley had spoken of betrayal by someone he trusted, of a painful breakup. But he hadn't mentioned that the betrayer was Daniel. On the contrary, he had spoken of Daniel as the one who supported him in a difficult time. Why had he lied? And more importantly, why was he now spending time with someone who had caused him so much pain? Why had he invited him to our wedding? And then I remembered the strange look on Daniel's face when Bradley and I danced in the square. That sad, almost wishful gaze. And his words about how Bradley looked happy, how glad he was to see him so calm and confident. Could it be that Daniel still had feelings for Bradley? Was he trying to re-enter his life? And if so, why was Bradley allowing it? My head spun with questions I had no answers for. I knew I needed to talk to Bradley, but I was afraid of that conversation. Afraid of what I might learn. That night I barely slept. In the morning, with dark circles under my eyes and a heavy heart, I went to work. All day I was distracted, unable to focus. My colleagues noticed my state, but I brushed it off, saying I was just tired from the wedding preparations. That evening I made up my mind. I called Bradley and told him we needed to talk. He immediately sensed the seriousness in my tone and offered to come over. I agreed. While I waited for him, I tried to collect my thoughts, to decide how best to begin this difficult conversation. But when he arrived, all the words I had prepared vanished. I just looked at him, at the man I loved with all my heart, and didn't know how to ask about what had been tormenting me. "What's wrong, Megan?" Bradley asked, sitting down next to me on the couch. "You look upset." I took a deep breath. "Bradley, I talked to your mom yesterday. Anne." He looked a little puzzled, not understanding where I was going with this. "She told me about Caroline," I blurted out. "And about Daniel." Bradley's face changed. He turned pale, his eyes widening in shock. "What exactly did she tell you?" he asked after a pause. "That Caroline was your fiancée. And that she had an affair with Daniel. With your best friend." I watched him closely. "That it was a betrayal that broke your friendship for 2 years." Bradley closed his eyes and rubbed his face with his hands. "I didn't want you to know about that," he said quietly. "Why?" I felt anger rising inside me. "Why did you hide such an important part of your past from me? Why did you lie, saying Daniel supported you after the betrayal, when in reality he was the betrayer?" "I didn't lie." Bradley opened his eyes and looked at me. "It's just, the story is more complicated than it seems." "Then explain." I folded my arms across my chest. "I want to know the whole truth." He sighed, as if gathering strength for a long and painful story. "Caroline and I dated for 3 years," he began. She was smart, beautiful, fun. I thought I had found the woman of my dreams. We were planning a wedding, talking about our future together. And Daniel was there, as always. My best friend, the person I trusted more than anyone in the world. He paused, collecting his thoughts. One day I came home earlier than usual. Caroline wasn't expecting me, she thought I was at work. And I found them together. Her and Daniel. In our bed. I shuddered, imagining what he must have felt in that moment. It was horrible, Bradley went on. A double betrayal. From the woman I loved and from the friend I trusted. I left without saying a word. Just packed my things and disappeared from their lives. And what happened after? I asked softly. After that came a very dark period, his voice grew heavy. I didn't want to see anyone, didn't want to talk to anyone. My mom and dad tried to help, but I pushed them away. I buried myself in work, trying to forget. And Daniel? Caroline? Did they try to contact you? Both of them. But I didn't answer calls, didn't read messages. For me, they no longer existed. And how did you reconcile? That was the question that interested me most. Bradley lowered his eyes. A year after it happened, Daniel's father died. Suddenly, of a heart attack. I heard about it from mutual acquaintances and I couldn't stay away. After all, we'd been friends for so many years. I went to the funeral. And we talked. For a long time, openly. Daniel told me that he and Caroline had really fallen in love. That at first they tried to fight it, but they couldn't. That they hadn't wanted to hurt me, but even less did they want to live a lie. And you forgave them. I couldn't hide my surprise. Not right away, Bradley admitted. It took time. But eventually I realized I couldn't hold on to resentment forever. That people can't always control their feelings. That sometimes love comes suddenly and unexpectedly, and fighting it is pointless. And what happened to Caroline and Daniel? I asked. Did they stay together? Bradley shook his head. No. They broke up about a year after I found out about them. It turned out the passion that had flared between them quickly burned out. They were too different, with different values and goals in life. And after that you and Daniel became friends again. I still couldn't understand how one forgives such betrayal. Not immediately, and not completely, Bradley answered. But yes, we reconnected. Daniel has always been an important part of my life, Megan. We grew up together, went through so much. What happened with Caroline, it was a painful chapter, but it didn't erase everything good that had been between us. And you never told me about it because I left the question unfinished, waiting for his explanation. Because I was afraid you wouldn't understand, he admitted. Afraid it would be hard for you to accept Daniel, knowing what he did. And he matters to me, Megan. I wanted you two to find common ground. I thought about his words, trying to sort through my feelings. On the one hand, I was glad Bradley had finally told me the truth. On the other, I was still troubled that he had hidden it from me for so long. Is there anything else I don't know? About you, about Daniel, about your past? I asked directly. Bradley looked at me for a long time, as though weighing something in his mind. No, he finally said. No more secrets. I wanted to believe him. I really did. But something in his eyes, in his voice, made me doubt. As if behind the story he told lay something else. Something he still wasn't ready to talk about. Megan, Bradley took my hands. I know I should have told you everything sooner. That was my mistake, and I'm asking your forgiveness for it. But please understand, for me it was painful. To remember it, to talk about it. I nodded, understanding his feelings. I'm not angry, Bradley. I want there to be no secrets between us. Especially ones this important. No more secrets, he squeezed my hands tightly. I promise. We sat in silence for a while, each of us deep in thought. Finally, I asked what troubled me most. Bradley, do you really want Daniel at our wedding? After everything that happened? He hesitated before answering. Yes, he said at last. Despite everything, Daniel is part of my life. And I want him there, on this important day for me. I nodded, accepting his decision, though doubt still lingered inside me. All right. If it's important to you, I won't object. Thank you. He pulled me into his arms and hugged me. I love you, Megan. More than anything in the world. I love you too, I whispered, pressing close to him. And that was the truth. I loved him, despite all the doubts and questions that still lingered in my soul. I loved him and wanted to believe that our love was stronger than any secrets of the past. Yet something inside me kept doubting. Something whispered that the story Bradley had told me was not complete. That behind it there was still something else. Something that could affect our future. The following days passed in tense silence. Bradley and I spoke as usual, discussed the wedding preparations, work, everyday matters. But between us there seemed to be an invisible wall, thin, almost imperceptible, but real. As though each of us was afraid to say the wrong thing, to touch a painful subject. On Friday evening, as we sat at my place going over the final details of the ceremony, Bradley suddenly said, Megan, I think we need to meet with Daniel. All of us together. To talk openly. Maybe it will help ease the tension. I was surprised by this suggestion. Are you sure that's a good idea? Yes, he looked determined. I can see you're still troubled by all of this. And I understand why. But Daniel isn't our enemy. He truly wants us to be happy. I hesitated, but eventually agreed. Maybe an open conversation really would help to clarify things, to dispel the doubts that wouldn't leave me alone. We arranged to meet the next day in a small cafe downtown. The place was neutral, not too noisy, but not so secluded that the talk would feel overly intimate. Daniel arrived exactly on time. He looked a little tense, but polite. Megan, Bradley, he shook Bradley's hand and gave me a slight nod. Good to see you. We sat at a table in the corner, ordered coffee and desserts. For the first few minutes we talked about the weather, the city, the upcoming wedding, about everything except the real reason we were there. Finally Bradley cleared his throat and said, Daniel, I told Megan about what happened between us and Caroline. Daniel froze, his face stiffening for a moment. Then he slowly nodded. I figured this conversation would happen sooner or later. Megan deserves to know the truth, Bradley went on. Especially if you're going to be at our wedding. Of course, Daniel turned his gaze to me. Megan, I know what I did may seem unforgivable to you. And I'm not looking for excuses. What I did caused Bradley terrible pain, and I will always regret it. I said nothing, studying his face. In his eyes I saw genuine sorrow, remorse, but also something else. Something I couldn't decipher. But I want you to know, Daniel continued, I never planned it. I didn't seek it out. It just happened. And when it did, I couldn't stop it. Did you love her? I asked directly. Daniel hesitated before answering. I thought I did, he said at last. But over time I realized it was more infatuation, passion, than real love. And her? Did she love you? Caroline, Daniel sighed. Caroline was a complicated person. Impulsive, emotional. She often acted in the moment, without thinking about consequences. I think she truly believed she loved me when she was with me. But those feelings didn't last. And you broke up. It wasn't a question but a statement. Yes, Daniel confirmed. About a year later. When the first wave of passion faded, we realized we had too little in common. That we were too different. And where is she now? I couldn't hold back my curiosity. She married a businessman from Chicago, Daniel answered. Moved there, had a child. As far as I know, she's doing well. I nodded, processing the information. The story sounded plausible, but something still wouldn't let me rest. Some unspoken tension, something I felt between Bradley and Daniel. Megan, Daniel leaned forward. I understand it might be hard for you to accept me after what you've learned. But I want you to know, I'm truly happy for Bradley. Happy he found you. You are exactly what he needs. A smart, strong, independent woman who loves him with real love. His words sounded sincere, but in his eyes there was a kind of longing that contradicted them. Thank you, I said, not knowing what else to add. I hope this conversation will help us move forward, Bradley said. The past is the past. What matters is what's happening now, and what will happen in the future. Agreed, Daniel nodded. And I want you to know, I'll always be there if you ever need me. For both of you. We shifted to more neutral topics, discussed the wedding, honeymoon plans, work. Gradually the tension dissipated, and the conversation became freer, more natural. When it was time to leave, Daniel shook Bradley's hand and gave me a polite nod. It was good to talk. I hope we've come a little closer to understanding one another. Yes, I decided to be polite. Thank you for your honesty. Bradley and I walked him to the cafe entrance, said goodbye, and went to the car. For a while we drove in silence, each lost in thought. Well? How are you? Bradley finally asked. What do you think? I hesitated before answering. I don't know, I admitted honestly. Daniel seemed sincere in his remorse. But still there's some strange feeling left. What kind of feeling? Bradley gave me a quick glance. Hard to explain, I shrugged. Just a sense that there's something more. Something I don't understand. Bradley stayed silent, focused on the road. His face was impenetrable, like a mask. You don't agree? I asked when the silence dragged on. No, that's not it, he sighed. It's just, the situation is complicated, Megan. And maybe some things are better left in the past. But if the past affects our present, our future, I couldn't reconcile myself to the lack of answers. If it still matters. It only matters as much as we let it matter. Bradley stopped at a red light and turned toward me. Megan, I understand your doubts. But believe me, there's nothing that could change my feelings for you. Nothing that could come between us. I wanted to believe him. With all my heart, I wanted to. But my intuition kept sounding the alarm, as if warning me about something I couldn't yet understand or see. All right, I said at last. I'll try not to dwell on it. Bradley smiled with relief. Thank you. That means a lot to me. We continued the drive in a lighter atmosphere, talking about plans for the next day, about work, about the weather, ordinary, everyday topics that helped create the illusion of normalcy. But inside me that quiet voice of doubt kept speaking. A voice that told me things weren't as simple as they seemed. That behind the facade of friendship and forgiveness there was something far more complicated and tangled. The next week flew by in the whirlwind of wedding preparations. I was so busy I hardly had time to think about Daniel and his role in Bradley's life. Final dress fittings, confirming the banquet menu with the restaurant, meetings with the photographer and the florist, all of it demanded my attention and energy. Bradley was busy too. His architecture firm had landed a major contract, and he had to work late. We didn't see each other as often as usual, but we spoke every day, telling each other about our day. On Thursday evening, as I was coming home after meeting with the wedding planner, I got a call from my friend Jennifer. We'd known each other since college, and though our lives had gone down different paths, we had kept a warm friendship. "Megan, hi," her voice sounded excited. "You won't believe who I just saw." "Who?" I asked, not particularly interested. Jennifer always had a flair for the dramatic. "You're Bradley with some man." They were having dinner at that restaurant in Soho, sitting in the corner and talking so intently they didn't even notice me. That must have been his friend Daniel. I felt my heart start to beat faster. Dark-haired, tall, with sharp features. "Yes, that sounds like him," I confirmed. They looked very close. "What do you mean?" I stopped in the middle of the sidewalk, a wave of unease rising in me. "Well, you know, just some kind of special intimacy in the way they were talking. Leaning toward each other, speaking in low voices. At one point that Daniel of yours even took Bradley's hand." "His hand?" I repeated, not believing my ears. "Yes, but just for a moment. He just squeezed his hand while saying something, I guess, important." I felt a lump rise in my throat. "Thank you for telling me, Jennifer. I have to go." "Megan, are you all right?" There was concern in her voice. "I'm sorry if I said the wrong thing. I just thought you should know." "It's fine," I tried to make my voice sound calm. "I'm just a bit tired. I'll call you tomorrow, all right?" I ended the call and stood there, trying to collect my thoughts. Bradley hadn't told me he was meeting Daniel tonight. Of course, he wasn't obliged to account for his every move. And yet, after all our conversations, after all the explanations, it felt strange. Without giving myself time to think, I turned toward the restaurant in Soho. It wasn't far from where I was, about 15 minutes on foot. I almost ran, ignoring the curious looks of passers-by. My head spun with different thoughts, different explanations for what Jennifer had described. Maybe she was exaggerating. Maybe it was just a friendly gesture. Maybe they were discussing something very personal, something important. But another part of me, the part that all this time had sensed something odd in Bradley and Daniel's relationship, whispered that maybe it was much more complicated. That maybe the story with Caroline wasn't quite as Bradley had presented it. By the time I reached the restaurant, I was out of breath. I stopped in front of the entrance, trying to calm my breathing and gather my thoughts. What was I going to do? Storm inside and make a scene? That would be foolish and humiliating. Deciding to act more cautiously, I went in and asked for a table. The maitre d' led me into the dining room, and I quickly scanned the room for Bradley and Daniel. They weren't there. "Excuse me," I turned to the maitre d'. "I was supposed to meet friends here." A tall man with dark hair and his companion, a bit shorter, with light brown hair. "Are they still here?" The maitre d' thought for a moment. "I believe I know who you mean. They were sitting in the corner by the window. But they left about 10 minutes ago." "Thank you," I tried not to show my disappointment. "In that case, I'll leave as well." I suppose they didn't wait for me and left. I stepped out of the restaurant feeling a mixture of relief and disappointment. On the one hand, I had avoided a potentially awkward situation. On the other, I still hadn't found out what was really going on between Bradley and Daniel. Deciding it was better to ask Bradley directly, I pulled out my phone and dialed his number. He answered after the third ring. "Megan?" His voice held a note of mild surprise. "Is something wrong?" "No, I just wanted to see how you were." I tried to keep my tone casual. "Where are you right now?" "At the office," he replied without hesitation. "Finishing up a project. I'll probably be here late." I felt the cold spread inside me. He had lied. Just like that, without the slightest pause. I see, my voice trembled, but I quickly steadied it. Don't work too hard, all right? I'll try. He sounded perfectly normal, as if he really were at his desk over blueprints, not dining with Daniel in a restaurant. Don't wait up, go to bed. I'll call you in the morning. All right, I swallowed the lump in my throat. Good night, Bradley. Good night, love, he hung up. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching the phone in my hand, feeling as if the world around me was collapsing. Bradley had lied to me. Without a trace of doubt, without hesitation. Lied so easily, as if he had done it many times before. What else was a lie? The story about Caroline. His feelings for me. Our whole relationship. Not knowing where to go or what to do, I simply wandered the streets, not paying attention to where I was headed. My mind was chaos, my heart hurt as if it were being torn apart. When I finally pulled myself together and looked around, I realized I was near Jennifer's apartment. Almost without thinking, I headed for her building. Right now, I needed a friend, someone I could trust, someone who would listen and support me. Jennifer was home, and when she saw me on her doorstep with tear-stained eyes, she immediately let me in and hugged me without asking a single question. Only when we sat down in the kitchen and she placed a cup of hot tea in front of me did she carefully ask, "What happened, Megan? Is this because of what I told you about the restaurant?" I nodded, unable to speak. Then, gathering my strength, I told her about Bradley's phone call, about his lie, about all the strange things in Daniel's behavior, about the vague suspicions that had been haunting me over the past weeks. Jennifer listened intently, not interrupting, only occasionally nodding or frowning. When I finished, she stayed silent for a while, thinking over what she had heard. "Do you think there's something between them?" she finally asked directly. "Something more than friendship?" "I don't know," I admitted honestly. "But why else would Bradley lie? Why hide a simple dinner with a friend?" "Maybe he was afraid you'd take it the wrong way," Jennifer suggested. "After everything you've learned about their past." Maybe, I wasn't convinced. But there's something else. Something I've felt from the very beginning but couldn't put my finger on. Some kind of special bond between them that goes beyond ordinary friendship. Jennifer was quiet for a moment, then carefully said, "Megan, did you ever think, maybe Bradley hasn't been completely honest with you about his orientation?" I flinched. That thought had crossed my mind before, but I had pushed it away as absurd. Bradley, with whom I had passionate, wonderful intimacy, couldn't be. But what if he was bisexual? What if his connection with Daniel was more complicated than just friendship? "I don't know," I repeated, tears stinging my eyes again. "I just don't know what to think." "There's only one way to know the truth," Jennifer squeezed my hand. "Talk to him. Ask him directly. But not now, not in this state." She was right. In my current emotional storm, the conversation could turn into accusations and shouting, which would only make things worse. "Stay here tonight," Jennifer suggested. "Tomorrow, with a clear head, you'll decide what to do." I nodded gratefully. The thought of going back to my empty apartment and spending the night alone with my thoughts was unbearable. The night passed restlessly. I drifted in and out of troubled dreams in which Bradley left me, disappearing into the darkness. In the morning I felt drained, but calmer. The pain and shock had been replaced by determination to learn the truth, whatever it was. I called Bradley as soon as I got out of bed. He picked up after the first ring, as if he had been waiting for my call. "Megan." "Good morning," there was worry in his voice. "You didn't come home last night." "I called, but you didn't answer." "I stayed at Jennifer's," I replied curtly. "We need to talk, Bradley. Today." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Did something happen? Yes, I wasn't about to go into detail over the phone. Can you come to my place after work? Of course, he sounded concerned. I'll be there around 7. Is it urgent? Should I come sooner? No, 7 is fine. I didn't want to disrupt my own plan. I needed time to prepare for this conversation. I hung up before he could respond. Jennifer, watching me from the kitchen, raised an eyebrow. Are you all right? Yes, I felt a strange calm. Today I'll learn the truth. Whatever it is. After breakfast with Jennifer, I went home. I spent the whole day in a strange daze. I mechanically went through the motions, answered emails, spoke with clients on the phone, took care of routine chores. But my thoughts were far away, fixed on the conversation that awaited me with Bradley. By 7 o'clock I was fully prepared, inside and out. I had taken a shower, put on a simple but elegant dress, applied light makeup. I wanted to look composed and confident, not lost and tearful. Bradley arrived exactly at 7. He looked a little nervous, but tried to hide it behind his usual smile. Hi, he said, kissing me on the cheek. What's wrong? You look strange. Sit down, I gestured to the couch in the living room. We need to talk. He sat, watching me closely. I stayed standing, feeling it helped me keep control of the situation. Bradley, I began, forcing my voice to stay calm. Last night you told me you were at the office. Working on a project. Yes, he nodded, still not realizing where I was going with this. That was a lie. I looked him straight in the eyes. You were at a restaurant in Soho. With Daniel. His face changed. First surprise, then confusion, then something like fear. How did you? Jennifer saw you there. And when I arrived, you were already gone. Bradley closed his eyes and took a deep breath. Megan, I can explain. Can you? Then explain, I crossed my arms. Explain why you lied to me. Why you hid a meeting with Daniel. Why you felt the need to conceal a simple dinner with a friend. He opened his eyes and looked at me with a kind of resignation. It's complicated. I have time. I sat down in the armchair opposite him. I'm listening. Bradley stayed silent for a while, as if gathering his thoughts. Then he began to speak slowly, carefully choosing his words. I didn't want to upset you. After all our conversations about Daniel, about Caroline. I was afraid that news of our meeting would make you anxious, make you think there was something between us. And is there? I asked the direct question that had tormented me since last night. No, he shook his head. Not in the sense you mean. Then in what sense? Bradley sighed. Daniel is an important person in my life, Megan. We've known each other for years, gone through so much together. There is a bond between us, yes. But it's not what you think. Then what is it? I was starting to lose patience. Why do you lie just to see him? Why does he look at you as if you're more than just a friend to him? Bradley sat in silence for a long time, staring at his hands. Finally, he lifted his eyes, and I saw in them a kind of resolve, as though he had made an important decision. All right, he said. I'll tell you the whole truth. But please, hear me out completely before you judge. I nodded, feeling my heart beat faster. The story with Caroline, Bradley began. It wasn't quite the way I told it. Or rather, it wasn't the whole story. What do you mean? Caroline really was my fiancé. We really were planning to get married. And yes, I really did find her with Daniel. He paused, as if summoning the courage for the hardest part. But the reason she was with him. Caroline didn't love Daniel, Megan. She used him to get to me. To hurt me. I frowned, not understanding. Why would she want to hurt you? Because she found out the truth. Bradley looked straight at me, and in his eyes there was something like defiance. The truth about the fact that Daniel and I. He couldn't finish the sentence, but I didn't need him to. All the pieces of the puzzle suddenly fell into place. Daniel's strange behavior, Bradley's evasions, the special bond between them that I had sensed from the very beginning. You loved each other, I breathed. You and Daniel. You were together. Bradley closed his eyes as if from pain. Yes, he said simply. We were. Before Caroline. I felt the world around me begin to collapse again. Everything I thought I knew about Bradley, about our relationship, suddenly stood in doubt. But, what about us? Our relationship? Your feelings for me? They're real, Megan. Bradley leaned forward, his eyes pleading with me to believe him. I love you. Truly love you. But you're bisexual. I tried to understand what all of this meant for us. Yes, he nodded. I always have been. I just never made it public. And Daniel too. No, Bradley shook his head. Daniel, he always knew he preferred men. But because of family pressure, society, he kept it hidden too. And you were together. How long? 5 years, Bradley answered quietly. Since university. No one knew but us. We were very careful. And then Caroline appeared. I was beginning to piece the story together. Yes, Bradley sighed. I met her at an exhibition. She was bright, interesting, assertive. And I thought maybe with her I could have a normal life. A family, children. Everything society approves of. And Daniel was against it from the start. He said I was lying to myself and to her. That it couldn't end well. He was right, I remarked. Yes, Bradley agreed. But at the time, I didn't want to listen. We fought, started seeing each other less. And then I proposed to Caroline. And how did she find out about you and Daniel? By accident. Bradley looked exhausted, as though telling this was costing him enormous effort. She found old letters. Daniel and I sometimes wrote to each other when we couldn't meet. She read them and understood everything. And decided to take revenge, I guessed. Yes, Bradley nodded. She seduced Daniel. Not because she wanted to be with him, but to hurt me. To show me what it felt like to be betrayed. And Daniel? Why did he go along with it? He was desperate. Bradley spoke quietly, almost in a whisper. He thought he had lost me forever. And maybe part of him wanted me to know the truth. To force an end to everything. I turned his words over in my mind, trying to fit this new, unexpected reality together. And what happened then? After you found them together? I left, like I told you. I couldn't look at either of them. Caroline tried to contact me, to explain it was revenge. Daniel tried to talk to me too. But I didn't want to hear from either of them. And then Daniel's father died, and you reconciled. I remembered the part of the story he had told me earlier. Yes, Bradley nodded. At the funeral we finally talked. Daniel told me the truth about Caroline, about her motives. And we decided we meant too much to each other to let that destroy our friendship. Friendship? I raised an eyebrow. Only friendship? Bradley looked away. We decided romantic relationships between us were impossible. Too much pain, too many complications. I wanted a normal life, Megan. A family, children. Daniel understood that. And that's why you started dating me. I felt the bitterness rise. So you could have that normal life? No, Bradley raised his eyes, and in them was desperation. I met you by chance. And I fell in love. Truly in love, Megan. You're an extraordinary woman. Smart, strong, independent. I've never met anyone like you. But you still love him, this wasn't a question. I could see it in his eyes, hear it in his voice whenever he spoke of Daniel. Bradley stayed silent for a long time. So long that his silence became the answer. I will always love Daniel, he finally said. He was my first love, my best friend, my anchor in the hardest times. But that doesn't diminish my feelings for you, Megan. I love you. I want to be with you, build a family, live a long and happy life together. I listened to his words, but inside everything felt frozen. I didn't know what to feel, what to think. My whole world, everything I believed about our love, was suddenly thrown into question. And Daniel? I asked. What does he feel for you? Bradley sighed. Daniel, he's always loved me. And I think he always will. But he understands that I chose a different path. He respects my choice. And yesterday? What were you talking about at the restaurant? Why did you lie to me about that meeting? Because it was a farewell dinner. Bradley looked down at his hands. Daniel is going back to Boston. For good. He got a job offer abroad and decided to take it. To start a new life. To let me go. I felt a lump rising in my throat. There was so much pain in this story, so many broken hopes, so many tangled, complicated feelings. And you didn't want me to know about it, I said, trying to understand his motives. I was afraid you'd take it the wrong way. That you'd think there was something between us. That it would affect your feelings for me. And won't it? I gave a bitter laugh. You just admitted you still love another person. That you've hidden an important part of your life, of your identity, from me. How can that not affect my feelings? Megan, Bradley stood and came toward me. I know this is a shock to you. I know you need time to process it. But please, don't give up on us. On what we've built together. On our future. I stepped back, not ready for physical contact. I need time, Bradley. I have to understand what all of this means for me, for us. He nodded, accepting my decision. I understand. Just, don't close your heart, all right? Give us a chance. I didn't answer. I couldn't promise anything in that moment. I needed to be alone, to process everything I had learned, to decide if I could live with this truth. I'll go. Bradley headed toward the door. Call me when you're ready to talk. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He gave me one last look, full of hope and regret, and left the apartment. Alone, I sank onto the couch, feeling my strength leave me. The tears I had held back during the conversation now flowed freely down my cheeks. I cried for the love that suddenly wasn't what I thought it was. For the trust that had been broken. For the future that was now in doubt. And deep inside, I cried for Daniel. For the man who loved so deeply that he was willing to let go of the one he loved, so he could be happy with someone else. The next few days passed in a fog. I didn't go to work, canceled all appointments connected to the wedding. I just sat at home, trying to sort through my feelings, to understand what I should do next. Bradley called several times, but I didn't answer. I wasn't ready to talk. I didn't know what to say. Jennifer came by every day, brought food, tried to distract me with conversation. I was grateful for her support, but I couldn't fully share everything I was feeling. A week later, I realized I couldn't go on living like that, suspended in limbo, avoiding making a decision. I had to do something about my life, about the wedding that was supposed to take place in 2 weeks. I called Bradley and asked him to come over. This time I was calm and resolute. "I've thought a lot," I said when we sat down across from each other in the same living room where our painful conversation had taken place a week earlier. "About us, about what you told me, about our future." Bradley stayed silent, waiting for my words with tense attention. "I can't marry you, Bradley," I said plainly. "Not now. Maybe not ever." His face went pale, but he didn't interrupt me. "It's not because you're bisexual. I could accept that. It's not because of your past with Daniel. People have the right to complicated histories." I paused, gathering my thoughts. "It's because you lied to me. Not once, not twice, you built our relationship on hiding an essential part of yourself. And because you still love him. You admitted that yourself." "Megan, Let me finish," I raised my hand. "I can't build a marriage with a man who loves someone else. Even if that someone is leaving the country. Even if you choose to be with me for practical reasons. I deserve more. I deserve to be first in my husband's heart, not second." Bradley closed his eyes, and I saw a tear roll down his cheek. "You're right," he said quietly. "About everything. And I'm so sorry it turned out this way." "I'm sorry too," I felt my own tears rising. "Because I really did love you. I loved the man I thought I knew." We sat in silence for several minutes, mourning the end of our relationship. "What now?" Bradley asked. "Now we cancel the wedding. I'll handle the logistics, guests, the restaurant, everything else. You can pick up your things whenever it's convenient." He nodded. "And us? Will we ever be able to stay friends?" I thought for a moment. "I don't know. Maybe someday. But right now, I need time for the wounds to heal." Bradley stood, walked to the door, then turned back. "Megan, I want you to know, what I felt for you was real. You're an incredible woman, and the one who ends up with you will be the happiest man alive." "Thank you," I whispered. "And Bradley, find a way to be honest with yourself. And with the people you love." After he left, I sat down and wrote Daniel a letter. Short, simple. I told him I knew the truth about his relationship with Bradley, that our engagement was over. And that maybe he shouldn't go abroad, running from love. That life is too short to give up happiness because of society's prejudices. After sending the letter, I felt a strange relief. As if the weight I had carried for weeks finally lifted from my shoulders. Canceling the wedding was a painful process. Explaining to relatives and friends, returning gifts, sorting out financial matters. But I handled it all with the business-like determination that had helped me build a successful company. A month later, Jennifer told me she had seen Bradley and Daniel together at a cafe. They were holding hands and looked happy. Daniel had never left for abroad. I felt a sting of jealousy, but also relief. I had made the right decision. They had found each other, and I was free to find my true love. It took 6 months before I was ready to date again. But when I met Matthew, an honest, open man who, from the very first day, never hid anything important about himself, I knew my heart was ready to love again. At our wedding, which took place a year later, I was truly happy. Not because I had finally found a normal life, but because I had found a man who loved me with all his heart, completely. Sometimes I think about the lesson Bradley's lies taught me. About how important honesty is in a relationship. Not just the big honesty about past and feelings, but the daily honesty, in the little things, in conversations, in showing your true self. My own experiment with pretense, when I posed as a poor girl in front of Bradley's parents, now feels like bitter irony. I condemned him for lying, but I too began our relationship with deceit. The difference was only in scale and consequence. Perhaps we all wear masks, hiding parts of ourselves, afraid of being rejected. But true love is only possible when we dare to take off those masks and show ourselves as we really are, with all our complexities, contradictions, and imperfections. That is my greatest treasure now, a relationship built on complete honesty and mutual acceptance. And that treasure is worth far more than any wealth in the world.